Tuesday, 8 February, 1791. I've been sitting here for hours in the dormitory thinking all about my midnight walk through the streets of Southampton as if it were still happening, living through it all again. I can't decide whether it was the most terrible hour in my life, or perhaps the most wonderful. But anyway, the letter has gone to Mrs. Austen, and Jane is beginning to seem a little better, almost as though she knows that her mother is coming. She has stopped muttering and tossing and turning, and her eyes have closed. Her breathing is still very loud. It rattles in her chest, and now it is like the sound of a tea kettle boiling. I get into my bed and wrap myself in the two thin blankets. But still I am scared to go to sleep in case when I wake I find that Jane has died. I have to keep awake, and I will keep awake, by writing. I can't help but think of what might have happened to me if I hadn't met Captain Williams last night. I know that I ran a terrible risk, but it will be worth it if Jane's mother arrives in time. There's another thing in my mind, and it seems selfish to even think of it with Jane so ill, but I can't help it. I know that if anyone recognized me out alone in the streets of Southampton at midnight, I would be ruined forever. My brother Edward John would be ill from shock if he ever heard of it, and his wife, Augusta, who is always so proper, would probably persuade him to cast me off, and send me out to the East Indies or some such place. I have a nightmare feeling that the next time Mrs. Corley takes us walking in Southampton, someone will come up to her and point to me, and then the whole story will become known. I must think of other things. Perhaps I shall write about Captain Thomas Williams. He told me the name of his ship. It is the Bonaventure, and he has been out in the East Indies. It is strange, but I felt so at ease with him once we started talking that it was as if I had known him for a long time. He is an orphan just like me, and that made a bond between us. When I told him that my father and mother were dead, he squeezed my arm just a little. I could feel the muscles of his arm through the wool jacket of his uniform. I suppose that life at sea must be very hard work. He was so big and strong that I felt very safe with him. I loved listening to him telling me about his life at sea, and about his far-off cousin who died and left him a property on the Isle of Wight, and about his uncle the Admiral, and what a stern man he was, though he thought he had done his duty by his orphaned nephew and niece when he placed the boy in the naval college and the girl in a boarding school. I think Captain Thomas must be a very good brother, because he seemed so worried about his sister Eleanor, who he says looks a little like me, except that her hair is not quite so blonde, and her eyes are green. He is so nice. He sounded angry when he told me how unhappy Eleanor was at boarding school, where the owner used to tell the girls that they could eat the bread but only smell the cheese. The girls there were starving, he said. I could hear the anger in his voice when he told me about that. I liked him very much when he told me that the first thing he did when he heard of his inheritance was to take his sister away from that school where she was half starving and allow her to live at home with a governess to teach her. I couldn't help thinking about Edward John. I don't think that if he had an inheritance he would want to spend it on me. But I don't want to think about Edward John or about Augusta. I want to think about Captain Thomas. That uniform of a captain in the Navy suits him so well. The gold braid shows up his brown eyes, and the epaulettes on his jacket make his shoulders look even bigger. His voice is lovely, velvet smooth, like chocolate. And when we had arrived back at the school, he escorted me up the steps, kissed my hand, and then shut the door very quietly behind me. I don't suppose that I shall ever see him again, but I will always remember him, and how handsome he looked in his uniform. I've tried to sketch a picture of him. It's not as handsome as he is, but it's a fairly good likeness, I think.